Here's Navarro on the run. Navarro's going to keep it. Navarro for 6. Touchdown, Bobcats.
I feel I had a hard time staying in my own lane.
Oh my goodness! Red Murdoch, pick 6.
Harvath inside the 30 to 20. Blake Harvath will score.
And Mendoza takes a big hit. He never saw it coming. Trey White got in there.
There's his man, Rucker. And nobody's going to catch him. Goodbye.
Intercepted. Tyree Skipper. Touchdown. Telly again, why not? A step forward and make it 2 for Telly.
Quarterback keeper showing off the speed. Steps on the gas. Untouched.
The G5 Hive. All G5 all the time.
Welcome to the G5 Hive Live, where we are excited to bring you the G5 college football coverage you love each and every week. I am Luke, joined by my co-host, Justice. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're watching us on X, please give us a follow, a like, or retweet. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. The G5 Hive merchandise store is now live. Link in the YouTube video comments, as well as pinned on our X page and at the bottom of the screen here. Billy Tuesday got a sweatshirt last week. Hopefully that was great for you, Billy Tuesday. But it's Monday. And Justice, this is the thing we do every Monday. And it's coming to an end here shortly. A brief hold while we do our work.
The live show comes to an end,
yes.
I guess, right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. This week and next week, and then you probably won't see us live again until August.
Yeah, it'll be getting team previews. I started this last weekend. I think it was Friday night or Saturday night. Started getting. We got 3 interviews lined up right now.
We have 3 scheduled for the next 2 weeks, I think.
Yep. So spring practices, spring games are going on. Information a little bit tougher to come by, but we're tweeting out everything that we see, trying to do our best. So if you're not following us on Twitter or X, please make sure you subscribe, and you're going to get everything that you need there. We're going to be a one-stop shop for you, anything G5 football related. Something a little bit different about you, Justice. I don't know what it is.
I don't know either.
No sling today.
Oh, well, I didn't. Did I not have? Did I have it last? I guess no.
Yeah, you had it last time.
Yeah. I guess yeah. I got out of it last Tuesday. Yeah. Like I don't know. Like I don't have it, but I feel like I still have it because I'm still limited in terms of what I'm allowed to do. I can basically feed myself, brush my teeth with that hand.
Take your contacts out?
Yeah, you can take my contacts out. But I'm not allowed to push, pull, anything with weight. So I don't know. It's still like being in the sling in some respects, but I have the freedom of movement. But now it's where all the pain comes from physical therapy. So that's not fun.
Well,
not any weights, but a lot of stretching, trying to get back the mobility. Anything once I get above my shoulder, it's it's hard. I don't have the strength to do it. And then it's stiff because I just don't, doesn't happen very often. So yeah.
Well, glad to hear you're doing a little bit better each day, hopefully a little bit better. But we've got a jam-packed show. We've got some news and notes that we need to cover. We've got 7 more teams that we're going to cover. So why don't you take us through what the Swarm needs to know?
So again, like Luke said, if you're looking for spring practice, spring camp news, definitely go follow us on Twitter where we are retweeting all that type of stuff and more on a daily basis. So go there if you're looking for that. We're not really going to get too much into that tonight. First thing I want to mention was Sam Houston announced today that all of their home games for 2025 will be played at Shell Energy Stadium in Houston. due to renovations of their home stadium, Bauer Stadium. They began construction of a new press box structure following the conclusion of the 2024 season. If they had played there, it would have greatly reduced their capacity for 2025. So they made the decision to go to Shell Energy Stadium. It's the home of the Houston Dynamo FC and Houston Dash professional soccer teams, as well as Texas Southern football. It also recently hosted the Division III football championship. So football is nothing new. They did have to move one game because of Texas Southern's field, or they used the field, I guess. I'm not sure if it's theirs personally, but they had to move one game from a Saturday to a Friday. I think that was the UNLV game. I think I read that was the one they had to move from Saturday to Friday. So anyway, Sam Houston will be playing off campus at Shell Energy Stadium for 2025. Some transfer portal / player news. Former Missouri, Notre Dame, and Arizona State quarterback Drew Pine is transferring to Bowling Green. They just got a new head coach there, Eddie George, and looks like they just got their likely new starting quarterback in Drew Pine. Running back Dominic Richardson, who is part of New Mexico State's recent transfer portal class, he was coming over from Baylor, is no longer on the New Mexico football team, according to the coaches there. Former Georgia and Arizona State quarterback Jaden Rashada visited Western Kentucky over the weekend. That's kind of an interesting one. He came out of high school, went to Florida, got all this NIL money, and then I guess it fell through, and then he sued Florida, ended up at Arizona State, started for them that year. Last season, transferred over to Georgia, didn't get any playing time, and now he's looking for a new home. Got to assume that if he does end up at Western Kentucky, that's a play for the future. I can't envision a world where, and we're going to talk about Western Kentucky tonight, but I can't envision a world where he walks in and wins the starting quarterback job over a quarterback that came over to Western Kentucky along with his offensive coordinator and had success. So if they do get Jaden Rashada, you got to imagine that's a plan for the future. Eastern Michigan linebacker Luke Murphy has entered the transfer portal. Murphy had 94 tackles last season. It's kind of a big blow for Eastern Michigan. They also lost James Jonkum, who I believe was their leading tackler. He's off to Virginia Tech. So Luke Murphy, I would have assumed, would have been someone they would have seen to kind of lead that defense, and now he's gone. So, that's some big blows to Eastern Michigan and their defense. I was kind of waiting for this next piece of news to happen, given the news last week of Kenny Burns getting fired, or not getting placed on administrative leave. So quite a few Kent State football players are now in the portal. The ones of note are defensive end Stephen Daly, defensive tackle Oliver Belote, linebacker Jaden Studio, and offensive lineman Andrew Page. Stephen Daly was a really productive defensive end for them. Him and Cam Olds formed a really formidable duo in terms of pass rush for Kent State. They lost Olds in the transfer portal earlier this season off to Kentucky, and now they lose Stephen Daly. And then Jaden Studio was a promising freshman. He was on our all freshman team, G5 Hive all freshman team. He was one of the top FBS linebackers from a true freshman perspective. So I'm sure there's gonna be a long list of suitors for those guys, and wish them luck wherever they end up. Also in portal news, Lenore Rhine, Division II school linebacker Jalen Willis has committed to App State. This was a pretty big get for App State. Willis had 90 tackles, 2 sacks, and 2 interceptions in 2024. He was named to the Southern Athletic Conference All-Piedmont defensive team. And he's also a former NIAI All-American. So a pretty good get for that App State defense. This piece of news, this saga has kind of been unfolding over the last several months, but Marshall wide receiver Christian Fitzpatrick. So he entered the transfer portal back, I don't know, right when probably shortly after Charles Huff left. And then he found out, I believe in January, that the NCAA was not going to approve his waiver for another year. So then he entered the NFL draft. And then today he announces that he got approval from the NCAA for his waiver for another year of eligibility. He's back in the portal again, essentially. The typical, I think the expectation is that he will end up at Southern Miss. But, they brought in quite a few receivers already. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But, kind of interesting saga there for Fitzpatrick going from portal to NFL draft back to the portal and another year of college eligibility. Also announced today, UNLV announced that defensive coordinator Zach Arnett has resigned for personal reasons. Zach Arnett, obviously new to UNLV along with the rest of that staff. He's formerly a defensive coordinator and a head coach at Mississippi State after Mike Leach's passing. In his absence, associate head coach Paul Gunther was named the interim defensive coordinator. Now on to probably the biggest single piece of news today, the House settlement. So that hearing was today, this morning, afternoon, evening. It lasted quite a bit long. I watched the majority of it. I watched almost all of it, I would say, except for like the last hour and a half or so. So I'm just going to kind of give some summaries of what happened today. So the judge, some interesting things that she talked about in the beginning, and then she also reiterated some of these things at the end of the hearing. But she suggested a phase in for roster limits, suggested collective bargaining as a better way to establish a compensation cap, but that's not part of this case, so it can't be considered. Her biggest issue in the settlement was that you're binding future athletes to a 10-year deal. And so she addresses this. It does end up kind of addressing that later on. She said she is not leaning towards blessing the NCAA's current rules as a part of the settlement approval. And she talked positively about the high number of athletes who have filed claims for the back pay. One thing I wanted to note, she made several references to a grandfather and an interim period for roster limits, as I said, so that would not affect any current athletes, but only the future. So that was a lot of the arguments today. We heard from athletes talking about, hey, I'm going to get cut, or my teammate's going to get cut. And so the judge really seemed to understand that and heed that. And I think, something when we get to her recommendations, that's something that she ends up recommending, is that there be some kind of phase in for roster limits, that it's not effective like immediately. One thing that was a little concerning for me, I guess, in terms of the overall scheme of this House settlement, is that this isn't just about football. It's about every NCAA sport. And she often seemed to always defer to football. I don't know. I'm not saying that she didn't understand that this is all sports. I think she did. But every time someone raised an argument, her answers would always be only centered around football. And so, for example, someone said like a new athlete. So a new athlete, they get 60 days, I assume from July 1st, to decide what they want to do. And, the argument was made that that's not enough time. Number one, these kids aren't even on campus yet, right? And so they wanted 6 months. And her response to that was, well, 6 months, the season's over. Okay, well, 6 months, the season's over for football. It's not over for basketball. It's not over for baseball. Hadn't even started yet for baseball. And so that was just one example of her kind of like only thinking of it in terms of football. And then there was another thing. They were talking about payments and how that's determined, and like the argument she used was, well, maybe it's their fault they didn't get enough touchdowns. So again, like showing like she was really heavily leaning on the football aspect of it. And I understand that football is the great moneymaker, and it is what rules college athletics. But I don't know, like that troubled me a little bit that she seemed to always kind of defer to football versus sports in general and sports as a whole. There was one argument by a defense attorney that said, and it was hard to tell who was a plaintiff and a defense attorney because they only had one pulpit or one speaking thing set up, and that was on the defendant's side. And so even though like the person might have been a plaintiff, like they'd be standing on the side that was labeled defendant. So that made it hard to try and follow. Well, are they a plaintiff or defendant? But one attorney argument was that there should be no roster limits and there should be no scholarship limits. It should be open to the free market. I thought that was kind of interesting. That's I don't know. That to me that's kind of crazy, but it's
that's America, Justice. That's what that is.
It was an argument. Another one argued, obviously Title IX. And that the gross settlement violated Title IX because 90% of it's going to men, only 10% was going to women. And his argument was that previously, when they talked about settlement, that there were people made, I don't want to say false statements, but made inaccurate statements. They made statements like that the payments will be coming from the individual conferences, right? Well, the individual conferences aren't governed by Title IX. The schools themselves are, and so that was he was arguing that now the conferences aren't going to be the one giving out these payments. The schools are going to be giving out these payments, and these schools have to abide by Title IX. So that was kind of the argument there. There's other arguments around. So in this settlement, there's a part about the NIL having to be approved, like outside agreements up to $600 or over $600, I should say. There's argument that's illegal for the NCAA to control what the NIL can do. So that I thought that was kind of an interesting argument. At the end of the day, she didn't approve or deny anything at this point. And she never was going to. She said that from the very beginning. She said that that there will not be no decision today. The overarching thought was that there would be a decision by the end of the week. But at the end, she kind of gave indication that she would approve the settlement if changes were made to the roster limits, i.e. phasing those in. So in other words, like athletes have an understanding and coaches have an understanding of what it's going to be 5 years from now. And that way they're not recruiting to that, they can recruit to that number versus having to cut people. The other thing was the inclusion of future athletes, and then being a different kind of class in terms of this class action lawsuit. And that kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning about her having concerns about the length of this agreement, which is a 10-year agreement. And so you're holding kids that, for all intents and purposes are playing on the playground in elementary school to this agreement. And so that was an argument, and that was a discussion point a lot today about elementary school kids on the playground, and then you're holding this agreement because it's a 10-year agreement. So those are kind of the two things that she wanted addressed. The thought is, the general consensus is that assuming once she gives her final say, which the assumption is it's going to be, I'm not going to approve this as is. You need to go back and work on these things. That from the time that happens, it'll be another 2 to 3 weeks before they can have something back to her to address her concerns. The NCAA attorney was still confident that they would meet the July 1st deadline for implementation of this settlement. So that's kind of the gist of it. If you're looking for more details, Ross Dellinger was tweeting all day what was going on. I believe he was there. But yeah, that's kind of what happened. So stay tuned. It's not a done deal yet, but it seems like it's inevitable to be a done deal. Probably the next big thing is when she comes out with whatever adjustment she wants to see made to the settlement. That'll be the next big topic, and my guess is that's probably sometime by the end of the week. So if that happens, we'll talk about it next week.
I just can't wait for when this does get passed or whatnot. The casual fan or the people who are not following us and we're talking about it, and I know we've talked about it fairly frequently, and if you listen to us, I don't think you'll be surprised when it does come out. But then your average fan who they'll be like, oh, what's going on? And it'll be like, it'll get this rejuvenation of, your ESPN, everything else will probably talk about it and stir the pot again. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out here in the coming months.
The one thing she said kind of in the beginning, I've talked about it a long time, is like a probably better end to all this is that the athletes become employees of the university and you have a collective bargaining agreement. I think she thinks that's really what this should be. That's like the ultimate, I guess. But obviously that's not what is in front of her. And so she has to, go off by what's in front of her. But I don't know. I just found that interesting because I think that's where it's all headed. And we'll eventually get there. And I don't know. I just feel like the faster we can get there, the better. Because it just feels inevitable at this point. And I think the fans, to your point, Luke, eventually they're gonna become tired of the constant. I mean, you already see it, right? With the transfer portal, money, etc., all these changes, and I think the faster that they can get to something that's more stable, the better altogether. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Couple more news items. So, this next one is something that I actually I was the guest on the College Football Express. I don't know, 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now, and one of the questions was like, if you could change 2 rules about college football, what would they be? And this was one of the 2 things that I said, hey, this is something that needs to happen. Well, Grambling State head coach Mickey Joseph basically echoed exactly what I said.
So he's a listener of the podcast and listen to you, is what you're saying.
I don't know, but he kind of had the same thoughts. But during an interview, he recently said there needs to be a buyout. If they move up from me and go to the G5 or P4, I should get compensation for that. And I don't disagree, right? Unfortunately, I don't think that happens until you get to a collective bargaining agreement. They're employees, they're going to have buyouts just like a coach does, etc. I think that's what will happen. What he's talking about is a player, right? A player that you spent the time to recruit, to develop, etc., and then they go and leave, and you're left kind of holding the bag, so to speak. And so I think once you get to a collective bargaining agreement and their employees, that there will be some compensation where Alabama has to pay Grambling State or Louisiana Monroe or whoever for said player. I just think that's what's going to have to happen, or what I think. There's certainly going to be argument for it to happen. Now, whether the Alabamas of the world will agree with it, that's another story. But I don't know. I just think that will eventually happen once we get to the point of them being employees and there being a collective bargaining agreement. As I said earlier, there were several spring games this past weekend: Missouri State, Kennesaw State, Georgia Southern, New Mexico State, and much more. And so if you're looking for information on what happened on that, I definitely encourage you to go over to our X account. You'll find all that. And if you aren't following us on X, please go over there, hit that follow button so you won't miss anything surrounding G5 college football, any news. Missouri State, there was a great article from Wyatt Wheeler on their spring game. Same with New Mexico State as well. There were some notes from Georgia Southern, some Kennesaw State notes. So yeah, if you're looking for that type of stuff, go follow us on X. We'll continue to tweet and retweet that stuff out. So go follow us there, and you'll get your fill of spring news and spring game information. That's going to do it for this week for news.
All right. Well, you know what that means? That means we are talking the nectar, the good stuff. This week's topic, we are getting into the coaching changes and offensive system deep dives, part 2. What do we got to start off? None other than Tulsa Golden Hurricanes. Coaching changes. We've got Trey Lamb, and he brings in OC QB coach Brad Robbins for the stats and data that we are going to use here. We're going to look at Trey Lamb, his coaching history. 2013, he was the quarterback's coach at Tennessee Tech. He's been a QB's coach and OC, head coach at Gardner-Webb, head coach at East Tennessee State, which is where his last stop. He was there in 2024. So when we do talk about the data purposes, we will be looking at 2021 through 2023 when he was the head coach at Gardner-Webb, and 2024 when he was at East Tennessee State as the head coach. Just kind of some tidbits on Trey Lamb. His head coaching record is 27-25. He is 0-2 in the playoffs. In 2022, Gardner-Webb won the Big South Conference Championship, but lost in the second round of the FCS playoffs. In 2023, they won the Big South OVC Football Association Conference Championship, but lost in the first round. So had some good regular seasons, lose in the playoffs. His offensive track record in 2024 at East Tennessee State, they broke a school passing record for a game with 459 yards passing. That was back in November 2nd. Gardner-Webb had back-to-back conference titles and winning seasons for the first time, and a first-time undefeated home record in 2023. They want to find about 12 explosive plays per game. Easier said than done. You can't really figure out when an explosive play is going to happen. Got a guy fall, whatever. But that's what they're trying to do. He comes from an air raid background. He played for an air raid coach, and his dad was a high school head coach, and he was an air raid guy. So you can already tell that it's going to be heavy air raid system. He wants to spread you out, but he also wants to run the ball too. He's going to play with tempo. The quarterback position will be like a point guard in basketball. It's going to be distributing here. Y zone concepts. East Tennessee State rushed for 2,330 yards, which was third best in program history last year. And the quarterback just used the quarterback to look at just like the safety and easy reads. So it's going to be a one-look system, run the ball, and like I said, the Y-zone concept that they will use.
All right, well, let's go see what that looks like for quarterbacks in a Trey Lamb system. So his quarterback one averages 286 attempts on the season, just under 2,000 passing yards, 14 passing touchdowns, 500 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns for a rush share of 22%. If you look back on his history, his most prolific passer was in 2022, had just under 3,000 yards and 19 touchdowns at Gardner-Webb. And his, rushing has been a pretty much a stable for his entire career as a head coach anyway, rushing from the quarterback. It goes from a high of 565 yards to a low of 266. So, they're not he certainly wants, his quarterback to gain some yards and use the rushing threat as needed in the rushing game. The rush share of the quarterbacks gone from a low of 19.35% to a high of 25.7. So they are a pretty good part of the rushing offense. If you look at design runs versus scrambles, it's like 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio, depending on the year. So they do design plays for the quarterback to scramble or run the ball. The one thing I guess maybe, to me is a little bit surprising, right? If you're expecting like a 100% air raid, like the numbers don't really quote bear that out. You're not seeing, 3,500 yards and 30 passing touchdowns. So to me, it's more of it's a spread them out offense, but it's more of a balanced offense between running and passing. Anything you wanted to add on quarterbacks, Luke?
Nope.
The target distribution from the quarterback, again, since Lamb's history is FCS, we don't have red zone and non-red zone data. But if you're looking at all target distribution, they target the slot receivers 31% of the time, the receivers on the outside 40% of the time, and tight ends 13% of the time. If you weren't with us last week, just a reminder, when you look at these wide numbers, that's typically two receivers, right? Almost every offense got two receivers out wide, and usually in general one slot. Some offenses have two slot receivers, but in general, you look at those wide percentage numbers, that's spread over two particular wide receivers. The other thing to point out, I was going to
say when you listen to us in podcast form, or it'd be a good idea to come check us out on YouTube, because we have these graphics, but we will then break down those out wide receivers or slot with what does that typically look like. What is your wide receiver one? Where is that located? Is the wide receiver one in this offense of the slot? Are they out wide, and what do they typically average over? And I talked about kind of like for here, we're looking at 2001 through 2000 or 2021 through 2024. So that's what we're using for a data set, and that will help kind of break that down even further.
Yeah, and when we're talking about target distributions, whether it's all red zone or non-red zone, understand that that's every slot receiver. That's not just like when we talk about receivers, you'll see a wide receiver one, wide receiver two, wide receiver three. Those are individual players, if you will. When we're talking about target distribution or tight ends, that's tight end one. And we talk about target distribution for the tight end one, and we say the tight end one's target share is 7%. But then we show you a graphic that says they target tight ends like this one 13% of the time. That's the tight end room as a whole, not an individual tight end or the tight end one, if you will. All right, let's move over to the running backs in a Trey Lamb system. So his RB1, his starting running back, averages 855 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, 27 receptions, 236 yards receiving for a rush share of 36%. They do get the number 2 guy involved. He's just under 500 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns. But I think the big difference you see here is the RB1 is the one generally getting the work in the receiving game. The RB2 or the RB3 are generally just kind of relief. They're not really the ones getting the lion's share of the work in terms of rush share or receiving yards. RB2, like I said, just under 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, 20% of the rushing share. The RB3, 176 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 7.4% of the rushing share. You look back at his history, and he's only had one running back, his head coaching history. average over or get over 1,000 yards in the season, and that's in 2021. And he just broke it with 1,003 yards. And his one season at East Tennessee State, pretty much spot on with these averages. The RB1, 749 yards. The RB2, 655 yards. So a little bit more of a mix, I guess, in 2024. But they do like to run the ball as well as use the RB1 in the passing game. Anything you want to add here on running backs, Luke?
Let's see here. I'll say you're not going to get in total, like we talk about yards. I'm trying to think total touches or average. Like they're probably going to get about 14, 15 rush attempts a game. I know, you'd like to see maybe more of a bell cow back, get more of that 20. How can I get to 20 touches or so? So that's kind of where they'll live in there. That's about all I got to add.
Yeah, it looks like the total touches for the season for the RB1 is like 182, RB2 95, RB 3 38. So they're not getting they're not getting 200 total touches in a season on average. Let's move over to the wide receivers. The wide receiver one in a Trey Lamb offense averages 78 targets, 44 receptions, 689 yards, and 5 touchdowns for a 21% target share. And they are predominantly outside or out wide. The same with the wide receiver two. There isn't, a huge difference. And you can see on the screen, there's not a huge difference in stats between wide receiver one and wide receiver two. The big difference is the yards. So my assumption is that wide receiver one is the one running the deeper routes. Wide receiver two, 71 targets, 43 receptions, 480 yards, 3 touchdowns, 19% target share. Also out wide. And their wide receiver three, 34 targets, 21 receptions, 326 receiving yards for a 9.3% target share. And again, out wide. You look at his history, the first year of his head coach history, the slot receiver was the wide receiver one, but hasn't been the last 3 years. Slot receiver was wide receiver two in 2023, and they were wide receiver 3 in 2022. If you look at 2024, all 3 of their primary top 3 receivers primarily played out wide. When we give that designation wide or slot, it doesn't mean that they exclusively play out wide. It just means the majority of the time they play out wide. So yeah, it looks like outside receivers are the ones to target in this offense. Again, like the running backs, only once in his head coaching career has a receiver gone over 1,000 yards, and that was in 2022. He had 1,168 yards. Also in that season is the only time he had 2 receivers get over 100 targets in a season with 111 and 122 targets. That was also the year that the quarterback threw for almost 3,000 yards. So, hasn't typically been a high volume passing attack, as we said, that bears fruit. Obviously with wide receivers, again, more of a balanced attack between passing and rushing. Moving over, did you want to add anything on the receivers?
Just I kind of mentioned the quarterback kind of being like a distributor. I mean, you can kind of see how that wide receiver one, wide receiver two, how they're kind of the same. And honestly, the wide receiver three and what Justice will get to here and the tight ends are kind of about the same.
Yeah, tight end one in his system averages 31 targets, 22 receptions, just under 200 yards, and 2 touchdowns for an 8.3% target share. And they also run routes 75% of the time on passing plays, means the other 25% they are blocking. So they're not really heavily utilized in the offense, in the passing game on the offense. And he's never really had a tight end break out. Only twice he's had a tight end go over 200 yards, and both times it was 207. So, as you can see, like that 200, 198, 200 yards, that's pretty spot on what you're going to see every year from, or what we've seen in the past every year from a Trey Lamb tight end. Target share goes from a high of 10.8 to a low of 4.45. Again, they're not heavily used. The up until last season, the ADOT was like 2 yards, so they're not really running routes very far out. Last year, the ADOT was pretty significant for a tight end, especially was 12.5 yards. But that was kind of an outlier in terms of his history at tight end. So yeah, tight end not a big part of Trey Lamb's offense. Spread them out offense that uses a dual threat quarterback. They like to run the ball as much as they like to pass it. They're not necessarily prolific at either running or passing. He does have that one season where they had 3,000 yards, and I don't know. Like, it wouldn't shock me if they get closer to that this year, just because of the defense, right? Is the defense going to be so porous like they were a year ago, where they get in a lot of shootouts? It's kind of what happened for Tulsa in 2024. It had a lot of games that ended in shootouts because the defense wasn't great. So it could be more of the same for Tulsa in 2025 as Trey Lamb kind of gets his systems installed on offense and defense. So maybe we see something trend a little higher up on the offense, closer to that 3,000 yard season that he had in 2022. And we saw 200 target receivers. I don't know. We'll see. Like, that wouldn't shock me given how porous the defense was a year ago. Do you have any thoughts left on Tulsa? Can we move on, Luke?
Nope. Let's move on to the next team. We've got the Delaware Fightin Blue Hens. Coaching changes. We don't really have any, but they're just new to the G5.
Yeah, they're new to FBS
system here. So we decided to do a deep dive on them. Who do you need to know? Ryan Carty, 4th season. His coaching, he's got an OC, Terrence Archer, being his 2nd season. Ryan Carty's coaching history started in 2008. He was running backs coach at New Hampshire. Then in 2010, he became the wide receivers coach at New Hampshire. And then 2012 through 17, he was the OC and QB coach at New Hampshire. 2018 through 2021, he was the OC and QB coach at Sam Houston. And then in 2022, he accepted the head coaching job here at Delaware, and it's been there since. Head coaching record is 26-11, 0-2 in the playoffs. In 2022 and 2023, the Blue Hens lost in the second round of the FCS playoffs. Just a track record on Carty's. Fast-paced scheme, looks to score quick, air raid background. Delaware has increased its scoring output and total offense each of the seasons that he's been there, but he's going to tailor his system to whatever talent he's got there. So I don't want to say a chameleon, but he's able to adjust based off the talent. So for data purposes that Justice is going to go through, we're going to be looking at his time here at Delaware 2022 through 2024. Again, FCS, so no red zone data available there. But as Justice breaks this down, the running backs target distribution are about 12%, tight ends 12%, wide receivers as a whole 76%. Break that down to out wide is 44%, and the slot about 32%. So let's dig a little deeper. Justice, what do we need to know about the quarterbacks?
The one thing I want to point out in his 3-year history is last year was kind of a roulette wheel at quarterback. And so that really drug the numbers down in terms of what you're seeing, because it's 33. It makes up 33% of the numbers when you're only using you only have 3 years of data. But with having said that, the averages in those 3 years, 287 attempts, 2,049 passing yards, 20 passing touchdowns, 213 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns for a rush share of 13%. Heavily influenced by last year when the top quarterback had 825 passing yards, so not much. If you go back in his history, head coach at Delaware, 2022 was his most prolific season, threw 3,214 yards and 32 touchdowns. And the reason why I didn't just throw those 825 yards out for the averages, because I didn't want to give folks false hope of what might happen in 2025. They went through a couple quarterbacks last season due to injury. Probably their most experienced quarterback, who would have done much better in the passing game, got hurt early on. And you have to forgive me, I forget his name, but he had the opportunity. He could have applied for a medical waiver and return. He decided he wanted to move on in life. He's not returning to college football, and so because of that, and given their quarterback situation once returning, I was like, well, it's probably going to be it's not going to be roses again once again at quarterback. So I went ahead and stuck with last year's numbers to include them in the average. I will say I think the quarterbacks they do have on staff are more adept at using their legs, perhaps, and so maybe we kind of see the offense rely on that a bit more than what we've seen in the past. 2022 is his high for rushing yards with 322 rushing yards. It wouldn't shock me at the end of the year if whoever the quarterback won for Delaware, has closer to 500 rushing yards. I think the 2,000 passing yards is a good number based on what I know about the quarterbacks today and what to expect for 2025. I don't think that's what he wants. I don't think to what Luke said. He wants a more effective passing game, but I just don't know that they currently have the quarterback on the roster to be able to facilitate that. And so I expect a dual threat quarterback, kind of a game manager from a passing perspective, and someone that's might use their legs, and that might be the most effective part of their game for 2025. Anything you want to add about quarterback?
Nope.
All right, let's move over to the running back. We'll say that if you're not familiar with Delaware, they did have their top running back from the last several years got invited to the NFL Combine, Marcus Yarns. So that's pretty awesome, right? You don't often see an FCS invite to the NFL Combine, but Marcus Yarns was invited to the Combine. So that just kind of shows you what level of talent he's had at University of Delaware. But you look at their RB1, kind of similar like Trey Lamb. They are getting the lion's share of the work rushing as well as passing from the running back perspective. RB1 averages 802 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, 21 receptions, 273 yards through the air for a rush share of 28%. Go down to the RB2, it's 439 yards, 4 touchdowns. Not really utilized in the passing game, rush share of 19%. And then the RB3, 211 yards, 2 touchdowns for a rush share of 12%. In his time as a head coach, he has not had a 1,000-yard rusher. The closest he came was 2023 with 937 yards. Last year, the leading rusher, Marcus Yarns, at 844 yards. RB2 had 450 yards. His first year there at Delaware, 2022, as a head coach, was a more even split between the RB1 and the RB2. He had 627 yards and 478 yards. But since then, they kind of relied on one person. But again, they had Marcus Yarns there, obviously he's a talented guy. They're going to lean on him. So we'll kind of see what that happens this year. I personally probably expect a little bit more of a shared backfield. I guess they don't have another Marcus Jarnes coming in to replace that talent. So it wouldn't shock me that that you see another 600 and 500 or 700 and 500 between RB1 and RB2. Anything you want to add on the running backs? All right, let's move over to the wide receivers and a Ryan Carty offense. So wide receiver 1 average, and again, you don't see a lot of difference in the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 stats other than yards. So my assumption is one's running deeper routes and one's running shallower routes. But the wide receiver 1 averages 74 targets, 52 receptions for 742 yards and 7 touchdowns with a target share of 18%. And that is most often the slot receiver. Wide receiver 2, 74 targets, 47 receptions, 496 yards, 7 touchdowns, also a target share of 18%. And that is one of the out wide guys. And the wide receiver 3 is the other out wide guy, averaging 54 targets, 30 receptions, 419 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, a target share of 13%. In his time at Delaware as the head coach, they have not had a 1,000-yard receiver. They've had the high is 863, which occurred last season with Phil Lutz, who is moving on. He's pretty sure he's not still there. So they'll be looking for someone to kind of step up into that role. And that was also the first time in his history that the wide receiver with the number 1 wide receiver was not in the slot. It was out wide. His number 1 receiver in the slot, his top slot receiver last year was the wide receiver 2 with 41 catches for 336 yards and 5 touchdowns. His most prolific season would have been his first year there, obviously with the 3,200 yards passing. But he had wide receiver 62 catches, 700 yards, 57 catches, 629 yards, and 40 catches for 619 yards. The top 2 receivers targeted 90 times and 83 times. He's also not had a receiver get targeted 100 times. So it's gonna, and I don't see that happening this year either, given what they have at quarterback. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a rough transition, at least in year 1 for Delaware. I just don't think they have the players, on offense necessarily to be able to produce at the FBS level, especially at quarterback. Moving over to the tight end in a Ryan Carty system, the tight end 1 averages 29 targets, 19 catches, 228 yards, 3 touchdowns for a target share of 7%. And they run routes 82% of the time. So the other 18% of the time they are blocking. His most productive tight end occurred in 2023 at 383 yards and 5 touchdowns on 28 receptions and 43 targets. Again, I don't expect much out of this passing game. I think what Delaware wants to do and what they're going to be able to do in 2025 are 2 different things. And so I don't know that we're going to see the full potential of the Fighting Blue Hens offense in 2025. I expect, like I said, a game manager type at quarterback that is mobile, and the biggest threat is going to be that mobile quarterback. They lose their best offensive weapon. They don't necessarily have the quarterbacks on the roster to be able to to air it out, so to speak. And so, again, I think they rely on the mobility of the quarterback and multiple running backs. And I don't know. I think, especially from an offensive standpoint, it's going to be a rough year in 2025 for Delaware, and hopefully there'll be brighter years ahead for the Fighting Blue Hens.
Absolutely. Well, let's move over to the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. They get a new head coach in Charles Kelly, and then OC Clint Trickett Kelly is more of a defensive-oriented mind. He comes in via Auburn, where he was the co-DC and safeties coach, and he's held different defensive coordinator positions in his coaching tenure. So we're going to look at Clint Trickett. His coaching history started in 2015, where he was a quarterbacks coach at East Mississippi, and he's been a quarterbacks coach, a tight end coach at FAU, co-OC, and quarterback coach at FAU, been OC and quarterbacks coach at Marshall, and this past year he was the tight ends coach and passing game coordinator at Georgia Southern. Just track record and tidbits on Trickett. He was featured in the Netflix series Last Chance U, which was chronicled East Mississippi Community College's 2015 and 2016 seasons. That's when he was the quarterbacks coach there. Featured him. I'm not so necessarily sure about him, as more so the team that was, but I found that interesting. His offensive philosophy often incorporates elements of the spread offense and his quick tempo. You see a lot of short and quick routes like slants and screens. He uses the RPO. Overall, he's a pretty balanced attack guy. In 2019, he coached a tight end and John Mackey Award recipient. He was the first non-FBS winner of the Mackey Award. That was Harrison Bryant over at FAU. In 2022, at Marshall, his offense was second in the Sun Belt in rushing at 205.9 yards per game. LeBourne was his running back there. 2023, his offense featured a guy named Rasheen Ali. That where if you've been following the G5 for a while, you're very aware of who he was or is now with the Ravens. He had 1,135 yards rushing and 15 touchdowns. So he's definitely been using the running back, in his time there at Marshall. His dad, Rick Trickett, is the O-line coach for Jacksonville State. I decided to mention that because, I'm 36. When my dad tells me to do something, it's still kind of hard for me to say no. So dad's the O-line coach. Dad says run the ball. I don't know. Maybe I need to run the ball. So I thought that was interesting, so I wanted to put that in there. For data purposes that Justice is going to go through, we're going to be looking at the 2020 FAU season along with 2022 and 2023 at Marshall. When he was at Georgia Southern, he was the tight ends coach and passing game coordinator, so we decided to skip that one.
Before I get into Clint Trickett, I gotta say, I don't know, I was very looking at the numbers of his offenses at Florida Atlantic and Marshall, I was very uninspired. Other than what Luke pointed out with the two running backs, at Marshall in 2022 and in 2023 with Laybourne and Ali, and I also wonder, was that because of an influence with Charles Huff, or do they just relied on the most talented guy, and so that's kind of how the offense went. But the passing game numbers and the wide receiver numbers leave a lot to be desired when it comes to Clint Trickett. And unfortunately, from my perspective, I think, Jacksonville State's going from one of the most creative minds on offense, or, at least a good offensive system, exciting offensive system there with Rich Rod, to one that's not so exciting. I think it's going to be much harder to get excited about under Clint Trickett, unfortunately. So we look at the quarterbacks. His quarterback one averages 239 attempts, 1,527 yards passing, 9 touchdowns, 412 rushing yards, 2 rush touchdowns for a rush share of 19%. His high quarterback was in 2023 at Marshall with Cam Fancher, 2,161 yards and 11 touchdowns. It's not inspiring stuff from a passing game perspective, but like I said, the quarterback and the rush yards, 412 yards is the average. with Cam Fancher had 554 and 458. His year at FAU, the quarterback had 225. So they're not afraid to use the quarterback. He uses the quarterback as a dual threat, but it's not going to be what you came to expect under Rich Rod and what you saw a season ago under Tyler Huff. It's just not that style of offense and running game. Not too much to get excited about from a passing perspective from a Clint Trickett offense. Slot receivers are targeted 27% of the time. The out wide guys 48% of the time, and the tight end 9.4% of the time. Let's anything quarterbacks before I move over to the running backs, Luke?
No.
All right, running backs. Again, this is like where Clint Trickett has shined in the past, but he had Rasheen Ali and Kalen Laborn, two extremely talented running backs. His RB1 averages 1,030 yards, 12 touchdowns, 18 receptions, 131 yards, and a monster rush share of 46%. The RB2 and the RB3 aren't really utilized as much at all. At least they haven't been in the past. He finds his guy at running back and he rides him. Again, that's a big part to who he had, Kalen Laborn and Rasheen Ali. It wasn't necessarily that way in his one season at Florida Atlantic in 2020, where his number one running back had 429 yards. His number two had basically 300 yards. So, that part, might be, and he has some talented running backs at Jacksonville State, right? And so I fully expect that they're gonna, find that guy and lean on him. With the running back stable that they do have at Jacksonville State, I think that's probably their best bet from an offensive standpoint. And given Trickett's history, I just think that they will rely on whoever that RB1 ends up being there for the Gamecocks in 2025. Do you want to add anything on the running backs?
Yeah, I'll take over the target distribution when we talk about these rooms. Just in general here with the running backs, they'll get about 14% market share. Outside of the red zone, they'll be about 14%. Inside the red zone, 9%. There's a little bit of noise there, but overall, he's not going to utilize the running back much in the passing game in the red zone.
All right, move over to receivers. And if you thought quarterbacks were bad, receivers follow suit, obviously. Nothing, there isn't a lot of variance between, the number one, number two guy, even the number three guy. And there's no prolific seasons here. The best season he has from a wide receiver was in 2022. The wide receiver one had 72 targets, 758 yards, and 6 touchdowns, and it's all downhill from there. His wide receiver one averages 57 targets, 39 catches, 467 yards, 3 touchdowns for an 18% target share, and he's generally out wide. Wide receiver two, 43 targets, 27 receptions, 343 yards, 1 touchdown for a 13% target share, and that is generally the slot receiver. And then the wide receiver three is out wide, 30 targets, 232 yards, a touchdown for 9.4% target share. I shared with you the number one guy with 72 targets, 758 yards. And like that's the only season over 500 yards. So yeah, it's not great from a passing game perspective in a Clint Trickett offense. At least it hasn't been to date when he's had the opportunity to be the offensive coordinators.
Well, when we're looking at these wide receivers in the red zone, if they happen to get down there, like you said, three touchdowns on average for a wide receiver one, there is an uptick in usage in wide receivers in the red zone. Overall, wide receivers outside the red zone, they're using 77%, and in their red zone, they go up to their usage of 81. So where does that usage typically get their uptick? Well, in the slot, outside the red zone, they're going to be 30% usage. Inside the red zone, it goes down to 27. So pretty similar to the same. Now the out wide guys will go from being used 43% of the time to 48% of the time when they're in the red zone. So they're going to look to get those touchdowns outside, and lo and behold, wide receiver one, an outside or an out wide guy with the touchdowns.
Well, moving over to the tight ends, and the highlight of his career was when he was the position coach in 2019, and Harrison Bryant, because as he's been an OC, like he doesn't really utilize the tight ends very much at all. His tight end one averages 21 targets, 15 catches, 138 yards, and 1 touchdown for 6.5% target share and a route percentage of 83%. So they're blocking 70 or 17% of the time. His high season as an OC was 30 targets, 215 yards, and 1 touchdown. So, yeah, like the rest of the passing game, it's not much better for the tight ends under Clint Trickett as an offensive coordinator.
And you can see when they're inside the red zone versus outside the red zone, about the same, 9.4% when targeted when they're in the red zone versus 9.1% when they're outside the red zone. So not much of a difference.
Unfortunately for Gamecocks fans, it's going to be a downgrade, I fear, on the offensive side of the ball, going from Rich Rodriguez over to Clint Trickett. But I think they do have some running backs that can be effective in this offense.
All right, let's move over to Kennesaw State Owls. Coaching changes. We've got a new head coach and an OC. We've got Jerry Mack, and we've got Mitch Militello as the OC. Jerry Mack has an offensive background, so we are going to be focusing on him and what has kind of influenced him over the years. He started in 2004 as an offensive grad assistant at Delta State, made his way over to Jackson State, Central Arkansas, Arkansas Pine Bluff, Memphis, South Alabama, North Carolina Central, where he pretty much was a wide receivers coach at most of those places. He got his first stint as an OC quarterback coach in 2010 at Arkansas Pine Bluff. He was the head coach at North Carolina Central in 2014 through 2017. At Rice, he was an OC quarterbacks coach in 2017 and 2018, and then he got assistant head coach in 2019 and 2020 added to his name. Running back coach at Tennessee, the Vols, in 2021 through 2023, and then Jacksonville Jaguars running back coach this last year. His head coaching record is 31-15. He's got 3 Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference titles, HBCU. He's owned 1 bowl games. In 2016, he was the HBCU Football Coach of the Year. His offensive track record is an up-tempo, high-powered offense. First year at Rice in 2018, his offense produced 3 wide receivers with 40 receptions and 500 yards, which is the first time since 2008 that had been done. He wants to implement a scheme that resembles what Tennessee's offense is. In 2021, they saw 8 offensive records get broken at Tennessee, and they ranked in the top 25 in scoring offense, total offense, rushing offense, offensive yards per play, and third down offense. In 2022, Tennessee tied a school record for rushing touchdowns with 40, and they had the number 1 scoring offense in the country. And in 2023, the Vols led the SEC in rushing with 204.8 yards per game, and they ranked 9th in the country. It's a lot of running. And when we look at Mack's data here, and when we're talking about him for those purposes, we're using 2018 and 2019 when he was the offensive coordinator at Rice.
And I will say, like, what he says he wants to do here at Kennesaw State doesn't necessarily match what his offenses look like at Rice. Obviously, that's before his time at Tennessee. So obviously that can change. The other thing too is, will he have the personnel to kind of run that Tennessee offense? We'll see. I certainly think from an offensive standpoint, I expect Kennesaw State to be better than they were in 2024. I know that's not a high bar to have to cross, but I do think they, based on what we saw in the spring, and then bringing in quarterback Dexter Williams, I do think that the offense will look much better in 2025 than what we saw in 2024. But looking at the data, Jerry Mack's offenses at Rice, his quarterback one averaged 189 attempts, just a shade over 1,000 yards passing, 9 passing touchdowns, 135 yards rushing, 1 rushing touchdown, a rushing share of 7.5%. Just not much production out of the quarterback. I mean, his top season at Rice was 1,319 yards and 10 touchdowns. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I expect a lot more production from Dexter Williams here in 2025 in this Kennesaw State offense. I don't know that I expect 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, but I would guesstimate, 2,300, maybe 2,500 yards passing, upwards of, 17 to 20 touchdowns from Dexter Williams here in 2025. But the Rice numbers are what they are, and you just have to hope that Jerry Mack took a lot from his time at Tennessee to kind of help progress his offense along from what we saw at Rice. Red zone target share, wide receivers when the quarterback's in the red zone, it's slot receiver 27%, out wide 39%, and the tight end 11% of the time. Moving over to the running backs under Jerry Mack while at Rice, RB1 averaged 668 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns, 27 receptions for 88 yards, a rush share of 32%. RB2, 365 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 receptions for 0 yards, a rush share of 24%, and RB3, 251 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a rush share of 11%. As you can see, they're not really heavily utilized in the receiving game. At least they weren't at Rice, and it's more of a safety valve kind of dump off. Especially you look at their RB1, 27 receptions, but only 88 yards.
That's amazing. That's actually really impressive. And when you're looking at the running backs, when their passing game utilization outside the red zone is 17%, or actually it's 16.52%, and then in the red zone it's 20.25. So it actually gets an uptick in usage there.
He does not, in his time at Rice, he did not have a 1,000-yard rusher. His high was 769 yards in 2019 and 8 touchdowns. So again, nothing too exciting here from a running back perspective during his time at Rice. But as Luke alluded to, his time while at Tennessee did see quite effective running game there when he was a position coach. Unfortunately for Kennesaw State, they do lose their top rusher from a year ago, and I'm not sure, from a talent perspective, that they necessarily. I think you're going to see more passing out of them because that's where their strengths are with quarterback Dexter Williams and some of the receivers they have versus the running game, at least here for 2025. Moving over to that passing game and those wide receivers, the wide receiver one under Jerry Mack has averaged 105 targets, 61 receptions, 679 yards, 4 touchdowns, target share of 33%, mostly out of the slot position. And I think that bodes well for probably their, other than Dexter Williams, their most talented player on offense, Gabriel Binyard, who's going to be a slot receiver in this offense So I think that, that kind of, that bodes well for him. And I think you saw, if you go back and look at our some of our retweets from Saturday, where Dexter Williams and Binyard already kind of have a good connection already rolling. The wide receiver 2 in Jerry Mack's offense, 85 targets, 48 receptions, 668 yards, 5 touchdowns, 27% target share out wide. And then, it drops off after that. Wide receiver 3, 23 targets, 14 catches, 102 yards, 1 touchdown, 7.3% target share. And that's another out wide guy. So it's primarily relying on, 2 receivers, the slot guy, and then the top guy out wide are primarily, getting all the passing games getting funneled through those 2 guys. I believe Gabriel Binyard's probably that guy in the slot. I don't know off the top of my head who the other outside wide guy might be. And
when you look at the statistics there, you'll notice that the touchdown, there's an uptick actually in the wide receiver 2, which is out wide. And that jives with what he likes to do when it comes to in the red zone versus outside the red zone. The slot wide receiver is utilized outside the red zone 32.4% of the time versus inside the red zone. It drops down to 26.58% of the time. Out wide, outside the red zone is 38.55%. And inside the red zone gets a very, very slight uptick of 39.24%. So pretty much the out wide are still going to get the same looks, but your slot will go down actually quite a bit. That's more than just the noise there, losing 6% there.
His most prolific season at Rice was 2019, and both his top receivers had over 700 yards, and they both had almost 100 targets, one with 105 and the other with 92. So I expect to kind of see something very similar to that here in 2025 from the Kennesaw State Owls. Move over to the tight ends under Jerry Mack, and not been a heavy part of the offense while at Rice anyway. The tight end 1 averages 25 targets, 16 receptions, 182 yards, and a touchdown for 7.8% target share. They ran routes 87% of the time. His most prolific tight end, 28 targets, 241 catches, 1 touchdown. Tight ends just aren't a big part of the offense for Jerry Mack. At least weren't during his time at Rice.
And you can see there, red zone versus non-red zone, 11% target share. So that's here. And yeah, so no big difference there. Let's move over.
I think the strengths of the Kennesaw State offense will be Dexter Williams, Gabriel Binyard, and whoever that top guy is outside for receiver. That's going to be the strength of the Kennesaw State offense in 2025.
Let's move over to the Missouri State Bears. Again, no changes in coaches here, but a new team to the G5. So we got to get to know them. Head coach Ryan Beard in his 3rd season. He was the DC under head coach Bobby Petrino. So let's take a look at who the OC is, and that's Nick Petrino, who's in his 6th season.
Bobby's son.
Yeah, Bobby's son. So let's look at this coaching history under Petrino. 2010 is when he got his start student coach at Arkansas. In 2013, he was assisted the quarterbacks coach and offensive staff at Western Kentucky. Then in 2014, he was a grad assistant wide receiver area. I don't want to say coach necessarily, but helping out there at Louisville. In 2015 through 2018, he was the quarterbacks coach at Louisville. In 2019, co-OC and quarterbacks coach at UT Martin. And then 2020 through now, he's been OC and quarterbacks coach at Missouri State. So some tidbits, and then I'll get into the track record. He coached at Louisville during Lamar Jackson's time there. At UT Martin, he mentored the Skyhawks' second OVC Freshman of the Year, John Backus III. He was a finalist for the Jerry Rice Award given to the nation's top freshman. In his first season at Missouri State, his offense averaged 310 yards per game. In 2021, they were 16th in the FCS with 436 yards per game and 12th in points per game with 34.2. In 2022, his offense eclipsed 4,000 total yards and more than 27 points per game. Now, that track record, he tends to favor quarterbacks who can make plays with their legs. He uses spread concepts and he puts an emphasis on the timing routes and utilizes the RPOs with a variety of personnel groupings. Now, getting into the data aspect of it, we're going to be looking at his time 2021 through 2024 here at Missouri State.
All right, looking at the quarterbacks, his quarterback one averages 328 attempts per year, just under 3,000 passing yards and 21 touchdowns. Rushing, 360 yards on the ground, 4 touchdowns, and 19% rush share. His most prolific season was in 2024, where his quarterback had 3,621 yards and 26 passing touchdowns. Good news for Missouri State fans. That quarterback returns for 2025 and Jacob Clark. And unlike our friends at Delaware, I think Missouri State's going to have the quarterbacks to be able to, air it out a little bit, if you will. And I think, based on how their defense has performed in the past, I expect them to have to air it out to kind of keep pace in Conference USA. But with a veteran quarterback, I think that bodes well for Missouri State and the transition to the FBS with Jacob Clark. Rushing, he goes from a high of 714 rushing yards in 2021 to a low of 69. A year ago, Jacob Clark had 236 yards rushing. So again, I think Jacob Clark, a veteran leader, and they'll continue to air it out just like they did in 2024. And I think they'll have to keep pace with the rest of Conference USA, given the state of the Missouri State defense.
And I mentioned that he likes to favor a quarterback that can make plays with his legs. Jacob Clark isn't really going to do that. They had 14 designed run plays for him that gave him 27 yards, and he had 236 on the year. So that tells me he's kind of more so running for his life or making plays impromptu. So I wouldn't, anticipate a whole bunch of designed runs if that's what you're expecting.
Yeah. I don't know that the depth behind Clark is great either. So I'm sure that would factor into the play calling as well. Moving over to the running backs, the RB1 averaged 757 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, 22 catches, 232 yards, for a monster rushing share of 48%. So they find their guy and they like to rely on him. The RB2 averages 287 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, 15 catches, 178 yards for a 16% rush share. And then the RB3 is 95 yards, a touchdown, on a rush share of 5.4%. Even though they like to, rely on one guy, find that guy, rely on him, they have not had a 1,000-yard rusher under Petrino's history. The high was last year, 872 yards, and that running back has moved on in Jacardia Wright. They did bring in running back Shamari Lawrence, come over from Florida International, and there's a freshman, and I want to say his name is King Davis. I could be wrong about that, but it was in Wyatt Wheeler's article from the spring game summary this past weekend. But I think it was King Davis, who they're really, really high on, really excited to see him in the offense. Apparently he's a true freshman, and he's kind of been the most productive running back, or was the most productive in spring camp. but they do expect Shamari Lawrence to be the starter here.
And target distribution wise, running backs are getting 16.6% of the targets.
All right, moving over to the wide receivers and a Nick Petrino offense. Wide receiver 1 averages 91 targets, 62 catches, 885 yards, 6 touchdowns for a 26% target share. And unfortunately for all these wide receivers, it's the 4-year history. It's been a 50-50 split, whether it's been a guy predominantly in the slot or predominantly out wide for all three. Wide receiver 2 averages 61 targets, 40 receptions, 539 yards, 3 touchdowns, 17% target share. Wide receiver 3, 44 targets, 389 yards, 12% target share. Once in Petrino's history between 2021 and 2024, they've had a 1,000-yard receiver, and that was in 2021. He had 1,103 yards. And only once in his history has he had over 100, guy with 100 targets or more. That was in 2023, exactly 100 targets. And that was Raylan Sharp, who was at Fresno State last year and is now at Arkansas, I believe.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing here is, usually when you're looking at averages and going through, there's like this high and low and this and that. And I mean, it's pretty tight. Pretty
consistent for the wide receiver 1 in terms of targets.
Yeah. 81 is the low. The high is 100. And it's like 97, 81, 100, 87. So when you're looking at that number or listening to this number and seeing that the 91 targets, like that's a pretty tight area as opposed to this big pendulum shift that you might see from year to year.
And in Wyatt's article, he's kind of said, they're looking for a new wide receiver 1, and it's kind of felt like that's going to be James Blackstrain for the Bears in 2025. If that name's familiar to you, he originally was a Georgia Tech recruit who entered the transfer portal. I don't know how long ago. I think he was at Missouri State a year ago, but he's now at Missouri State. He looks to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense, but they also said that they're probably looking to add some receivers in this next portal period as well.
And then from usage wise, wide receivers out wide will be used 35.57% of the time versus the slot 37.58% of the time.
Moving over to the tight ends, they've got a 4th-year senior returning, so I expect big things out of the tight end in 2025. But on the average, the tight end 1 is 22 targets, 17 receptions, 255 yards, and 2 touchdowns, with a 6% target share and an 82% route percentage, or when they route run percentage. And the most prolific year was in 2024 with Lance Mason, 43 targets, 34 receptions, 590 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And he returns in 2025, along with his quarterback, Jacob Clark. Wyatt talked a little bit about it, but that you didn't really see that connection in the spring. But that wouldn't really shock me, right? Because he knows what he's got there, right? He's trying to work on the connections with the receivers. I would expect Lance Mason to repeat basically what he did a year ago, which was almost 600 yards, which is really productive for a tight end.
When you look back at previous seasons, the previous 3 seasons are 142 yards receiving for the tight end, and then the big blow up with 590. So
this is his 4th year in the system for Lance Mason. So and in the quarterback returning, I would expect more of the same in 2025 in terms of.
If it ain't broke, why look to fix it?
Right. Especially they're moving up a level. They're gonna, the defense isn't great, and they're gonna have to throw it around to stay in ball games.
And then from a usage percentage, for tight ends, they get used 10.66%. And again, no red zone data available for FCS. All right, let's move over to, let me flip my sheet here. The Sam Houston Bearkats, Luke special. While Justice might be East Carolina Pirate, I am Sam Houston. Coaching changes. Head coach Phil Longo will be in his first season. He's got a extensive record as OC. So we will take a look at Phil Longo. Started his coaching tenure in 1996 as a head coach at a high school in New Jersey. Then he became assistant head coach and OC, became a head coach at LaSalle in 2004, then goes and becomes an OC in 2006 in Minnesota Duluth. Then makes his way over to a wide receiver position and then goes back to the OC position in 2012 at Slippery Rock. Then was at Sam Houston in 2014 through 2016, makes stops at Ole Miss, UNC, and last Wisconsin. As a head coach, his record is 7-4 with LaSalle. Interesting that he has coached for 28 years, and his longest stand at a school was LaSalle and UNC with 4 years. So I thought that was just kind of interesting and just how long he had been coaching. His offensive track record, known for his don't bleak offense, which is a version of the air raid scheme, emphasizes a high tempo, pass heavy approach, but the ability to adapt and run the ball effectively when needed. Quick decision-making offenses that are aimed to keep the offense moving and create opportunities for big plays. He has a red zone success with scoring more touchdowns than any FBS team over the last 3 seasons, which I thought was interesting. At LaSalle, his offenses set 19 school records. At Wisconsin in 2023, the 281 completions and 469 pass attempts were both all-time records at Wisconsin. Now, there's been mention that he wants to run an offense similar to his last stop at Sam Houston. So what was that? Emphasis on the running. Offense ranked among the top 10 FCS teams in both rushing in 2014 and 2015. They also saw a 1,000-yard rusher in each of those seasons. In 2015, the offense had nearly 8,000 yards of total offense, 3,817 yards rushing, and 43 rushing touchdowns. There's 7,975 yards of the Southland Conference season record and ranked third all-time in NCAA Division I FCS history. In 2016, the quarterback Jeremiah Briscoe threw for 4,602 yards and 57 touchdowns, an FCS single-season record at the time. As an OC, he's 130-70, been a part of 6 conference championships, and made 7 postseason appearances. So exciting times to be a part of Sam Houston. Interesting to see what this offense looks like here in 2025. For data purposes, we'll be using 2017 and 2018 Ole Miss, 2019 through 2022 at North Carolina, and 2023 through 2024 at Wisconsin.
Moving over to a Phil Longo quarterback, and he's not afraid to use the quarterback to run the ball. He's got a 1,000-yard rusher at quarterback under his time, and then another quarterback with almost 900 yards. But his quarterback one averages 376 attempts, just over 3,000 yards passing, 23 touchdowns, and 462 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, a rush share of 18%. As I said, he's got that 1,000-yard running back in his under his belt. That was North Carolina Sam Howell, and we got 900 yards from Drake May the following year. So he can tailor his offense to whatever the quarterback strengths are. But Hunter Watson, running the ball is a strength of Hunter Watson. So I expect that to be a featured part of the offense under Phil Longo. He's had 5 seasons of a quarterback throwing for more than 3,000 yards. The high was with Drake May in 2022. He had over 4,000 yards. There's also the high for touchdowns with 37. 3 times he's had a quarterback throw for 30 or more touchdowns. And so, yeah, quarterback, throwing the ball, quarterback running the ball, heavily featured in a Phil Longo offense.
And last year we saw that. Last year we saw the running back or the quarterback take off and run quite a bit, Hunter Watson.
Yeah. So, I think the biggest thing will be, or the biggest question mark, I guess, is from a passing perspective, if Hunter Watson can get there to what we've seen from a Phil Longo quarterback. And I think there's no question what he can do on the ground with his legs. The question mark is what Hunter Watson can do through the air when he's passing the ball. Moving over to the running backs under Phil Longo, his RB1 averages 952 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, 19 receptions, 157 yards through the air for a 39% rush share. RB2, 521 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, 12 catches, 105 yards, 21% rushing share. And RB3, 200 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 6 catches, 30 yards for 9.4% rushing share. He's had 5 1,000-yard running backs in his career as an OC. 2 in one season in 2020 while at North Carolina. Both of those guys went on to the NFL, Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. So definitely not afraid to use to run the ball. Those 2019 and 2020 at North Carolina, when he had 2 prolific running backs in Carter and Javonte Williams, they shared the ball. Outside of that, it was primarily the RB1 getting the lion's share of the work, as evidenced by the almost 40% rush share. It's been as high as 46%, as low as 27%. But generally speaking, he likes to find that one RB1 and feed them. Obviously, you got 2 NFL guys like a Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. He's going to feed them both. But in general, he's looking to feed that RB1 on the season, give him the majority of the carries, majority of the work.
And then running back usage outside the red zone versus inside the red zone, about the same. 11.85% of usage will be outside of the red zone, and inside the red zone, 11.41.
Moving over to the wide receivers, and Phil Longo is known as a kingmaker, if you will, in terms of a slot receiver. The slot receiver kind of dominates his offense, and that's kind of where the offense from a passing game kind of runs through. His wide receiver 1 averages 102 targets, 74 receptions, 1,068 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns for a 25% target share. Again, that wide receiver 1 is coming out of the slot. Wide receiver 2, 74 targets, 45 receptions, 699 yards, 6 touchdowns, 19% target share. That receiver is out wide, and the wide receiver 3 also out wide. 48 targets, 430 yards, 3 touchdowns, 12% target share. In his time as an OC, the history that we use, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times he's had a 1,000-yard or 1,000-yard plus receiver in his time as an OC. And he's had one season where he had 2,000-yard guys in 2019 at North Carolina, and Daz Newsome and Diami Brown both had 1,000-yard seasons. Much like we just talked about, with the previous team, really, other than 2024, there's a lot of consistency for targets for the wide receiver 1 in a Phil Longo offense. It's the slot guy. Last year was kind of an anomaly, I would say, but the low for the slot guy was 75. But every other year besides last year, you're talking 90 plus targets for the wide receiver in the slot. So that's pretty consistent. Like I said, he's known as a kingmaker for a slot receiver at Sam. And I would expect no difference there at Sam Houston. So whoever's going to be that slot guy, that's where the passing game is going to evolve or go through for the Bearcats in 2025.
So you're telling me that number of 102 could be way more if last season wasn't dragging us down.
Yeah. I mean, the high is 144 targets. That's the high. So, yeah.
Well, let's look at.
I think it's a lot's going to depend on how Hunter Watson develops as a passer, I think.
And when we look at the usage inside the red zone versus outside the red zone, something that it kind of jumps out to me, as you see here, is the wide receiver 1 usage is 8 touchdowns and wide receiver 2 usage is 6. But when you're looking at red zone usage, the slot outside the red zone gets used 38.04% of the time, while in the red zone it drops dramatically to 22.2%. So they're not really looking for the slot in the red zone. They're looking out wide in relation to the slot. There's still a down tick, 32.98% outside the red zone usage for out wide, down to 27.72%. So kind of tells me that wide receiver 1 with that averaging 8 touchdowns being out wide is more so touchdowns happening outside the red zone than maybe necessarily happening inside the red zone. You might have a year or two here where everything clicks right, but I would say that's where those touchdowns are coming from.
All right, let's move over to the tight ends under Phil Longo. The tight end 1 averages 27 targets, 19 catches, 234 yards, 2 touchdowns for 6.9% target share, and they are running routes 71% of the time. So 29% of the time. I'm sorry, 19. No, that's right, 29% of the time they are blocking on passing downs. He does have some prolific, tight end usage in his past. He had a season of 507 yards and 50 targets in 2022 with Bryson Nesbitt there at North Carolina. At Ole Miss, he had Dawson Knox, 34 targets, 321 yards. So I think if he has a talent at tight end, he's not afraid to necessarily use it. But it's not a prolific part of the offense in general. Last year was kind of a low. The tight end 1 only saw 20 targets for 82 yards and 1 touchdown. So and then they are used to help block a lot. So I don't necessarily believe that based on what I know of Sam Houston today, they have a quote special talent at tight end. So I wouldn't expect them to be used heavily in the passing game, in terms of using them as a receiver. They're going to be used as a blocker to kind of help provide that protection for the quarterback.
And then, like you said, they're inside the red zone versus outside the red zone. They're going to have a little bit of a tick up to 17.2% inside the red zone versus a 12.43% outside of the red zone. But again, we're looking at the slot here, and then based off the numbers, hey, we're going to run the ball in for touchdowns based off of looking at that offensive track record on looking at the running backs, and then the decrease in usage of the slot and out wide receivers when we get in there. We're looking to run the ball in.
Yeah, I think that the big question is how much Hunter Watson develops as a passer. Again, expect him to be used heavily in the run game. Rely on that RB1, whoever that is, and then the passing game will go through that slot receiver at Sam Houston in 2025.
All right, well, let's move over to our last team of the night, Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. Coaching changes. We've got OC Rick Bowie coaching history started as an intern at FIU in 2011, did some tight end and quarterback coaching, then was a co-OC, quarterback, tight end, director of admissions and enrollment at St. Francis Academy. I thought that was interesting, just kind of anything and everything there. Was an offensive grad assistant at West Virginia, offensive grad assistant at Houston, wide receiver coach at Houston, and then went back, then got an OC and quarterback coaching gig at Valdosta State in 2022 through 2023, and then last year was an OC and quarterbacks coach at Abilene Christian. His offensive track record, pass-friendly offense that's based out of an air raid style, wide open, very explosive. In 2024, Bowie's offense ranked 4th in total offense at 469.6 yards per game and 16th nationally in scoring 33.8 points per game. Abilene Christian ranked 7th nationally in passing offense. In 2023, his offense averaged 36.9 points per game and was top 10 nationally in passing yards per game and total touchdowns. So for data purposes, we're going to be looking at 2024 at Abilene Christian. Don't have the Valdosta State data. And again, for target distribution, when we're looking at these, no red zone data available for FCS.
Yeah, it's we're basically just kind of looking back to what he was able to do at Abilene Christian. That's really the only coaching history from a statistical standpoint that's readily available. Fortunately, he brings his quarterback with him over from Abilene Christian. They come over to Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky for the last, at least under Helton, has been known as a pass happy offense. We saw what Helton was able to do when he brought over that Houston Baptist offense with Kitley and Arbuckle and Bailey Zappi and Jared Stern. So perhaps Helton's trying to recreate some of that magic here, bringing over the OC and Rick Bowie and the quarterback and Maverick McIver. Throw the ball around the yard here in 2025. And I think Western Kentucky is going to be successful at doing that. And they're probably right now, I would say they're probably my favorite to win Conference USA. But let's get into the details on the quarterback. So, last year, the quarterback had 497 attempts, 3,814 yards passing, 30 passing touchdowns, 77 yards on the ground, 0 rushing touchdowns for a rush share just under 6%. As you can see, the quarterback is not used, or at least, Maverick McIver wasn't used in the rushing game. He's, slinging it all around. And that's kind of what we've got to know from Western Kentucky in the past. And, Rick Bowie kind of mirrors that with what he did at Abilene Christian in 2024. Moving over to the running backs in his one season at Abilene Christian, he got the RB1 had 1,338 yards rushing, 14 rushing touchdowns. Used in the passing game, 46 receptions, 349 yards, a rush share of 50%. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Mike Leach offenses, right? Where you kind of, not from a rushing perspective, but more from how they utilized in the receiving game with all those receptions. RB2, 636 yards, 11 touchdowns, 17 receptions, 135 yards receiving, 28% rush share. RB3, 129 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 receptions for 30 yards, and a 6.4% rush share. If he gets 1,000-yard rusher at Western Kentucky in 2025, that he will have done something that hasn't. I couldn't tell you the last time Western Kentucky has had a 1,000-yard rusher. It feels like it's been a while. But as you can see in his offenses, the RB1 is utilized in the passing game, so that's encouraging. I don't know that I personally would be betting that they'll have a 1,000-yard rusher in 2025 at Western Kentucky, but I certainly would expect that those receiving numbers will mirror what to expect from Western Kentucky in 2025.
So, do you want to take a guess on the last time that they had a 1,000-yard rusher?
2017, 2016.
2016, Anthony Wales ran for 1,091 yards. He was the 6th consecutive 1,000-yard rusher for WKU.
I think that was during the Brom years, I think. Like I said, don't necessarily expect to see 1,000-yard rusher for Western Kentucky in 2025, but do expect to see the running back utilized in the passing game.
And you said they're being utilized in the passing game. Their target distribution is 14.99%, so about 15%, which is pretty good for running back usage.
Moving over to the wide receivers, the wide receiver 128 targets, 73 receptions, 1,117 yards, 8 touchdowns, target share of 24%. That particular receiver was out wide. Wide receiver 2, 112 targets, 76 receptions, 998 yards, 10 touchdowns, 21% target share in the slot. And then wide receiver 3, 64 targets, 42 receptions, 485 yards, 4 touchdowns, 12% target share, also in the slot. So, just looking at that tells me that primarily what you're seeing on offense is 2 receivers in the slot, 2 receivers out wide, not really utilizing a tight end very much at all. But it does look like offense is very much funneled through 2 receivers, one in the slot and one in the outside. And there's not a ton of difference between the two. They are pretty similar. And I would expect, that kind of feels like what we've seen in the past from Western Kentucky. So I think it jives with what Helton wants to do. In terms of wide receivers, it's going to be someone new is going to have to step up in 2025. Their top options from 2024 have graduated or are out of eligibility. So you're going to see someone new step up and fill that wide receiver 1 and 2 role for Western Kentucky in 2025.
And their utilization out wide receivers are targeted 41.56% of the time, while the slot is utilized 38.14% of the time.
All right, moving over to the tight end. Again, like I said, the opportunities in those offense are probably fairly limited from the tight end. Looking at the wide receiver numbers, where you got two slot guys and 2 guys out wide, but the tight end averages 21 targets, 15 receptions, 223 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4% target share. When they are in there, they are running routes 85% of the time and blocking the other 15% of the time. But I don't think tight ends heavily utilized in this passing game for Rick Bowie, and it's not something we've really seen Western Kentucky for some time anyway. So that kind of jives with what they've done in the past as well.
The whole tight end room, you see the tight end 1 there gets a target share of 4%. The whole room is 5.31%.
Yeah, it's just not. It's not utilized very much, right?
But it will be one guy if you want about all that 4%. So
and so expect Western Kentucky to sling the ball around, man. Use the running backs, use the running back 1 in the passing game, and then for wide receivers, the passing game is funneled through the slot receiver and whoever the top guy is out wide. And most often it seems like they're in a 4 wide receiver set with 2 slot guys and two guys out wide, and the tight end is not really utilized much at all in the passing game.
Well, that's going to do it for part 2 of our series. Come back and join us next week as we continue to bring you up to date on all the latest news and happenings in the world of G5 college football. We'll be back live with you all on Monday, April 14th, right around 10:30 p.m. Eastern, as we continue part 3 of our new offensive coaches deep dive featuring Rice, Ball State, Central Michigan, Bowling Green, UMass, Nevada, App State, and Southern Miss. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. On X, give us a follow. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe and leave those 5-star ratings and review. Thank you all for your support. Until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
Oh,